Some promises are whispered in hospital rooms. Others are forged in silence, carried in the hearts of those who refuse to break. This is a story about a daughter, a dying father, and the moment that changed everything. The morning sun painted the Virginia mountains in shades of gold and shadow. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, just 28 years old, stepped from the unmarked SUV with the kind of quiet confidence that comes not from arrogance, but from a lifetime of having to prove yourself when nobody believed you could. Her father, the legendary Colonel William Mitchell, had taught her something simple yet profound: respect isn't given because of your name or your uniform. It's earned through action, through blood, through showing up when everyone expects you to fail. Today, Sarah was about to show up. The SEAL training facility stretched before her like a proving ground designed by the gods of war themselves. Shooting ranges, obstacle courses, tactical buildings, all nestled against mountains that had witnessed the making of America's most elite warriors. Sarah tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, her fingers trembling slightly. Not from fear. From purpose. Because somewhere in a hospital bed, her father was fighting a battle even his legendary courage couldn't win. Cancer was stealing him day by day, and she'd made him a promise. Commander Jackson approached, his face carved from skepticism and military protocol. "Lieutenant Mitchell, I wasn't informed we'd have a visitor today. Special request from General Wolfenberger, sir. I'm here to observe the advanced marksmanship training." His eyes scanned her credentials with the enthusiasm of a man being told to babysit. "Read, observe, write," he muttered, gesturing toward the main range where a dozen SEALs were preparing their equipment. "Follow me." The moment Sarah stepped onto that range, she felt it. The shift in the air. Conversations died to whispers. Eyes tracked her with that familiar mixture of curiosity and dismissal. She'd seen that look her entire life. In every room she'd entered as the only woman. In every course where men assumed she'd gotten there because of her father's name. The unspoken question hung in the air like smoke: what's she doing here? "Gentlemen," Commander Jackson announced with barely concealed amusement, "Lieutenant Mitchell will be observing today's session. Apparently, headquarters thinks we need babysitting." The laughter that followed was expected. Sarah maintained her composure, her voice steady. "Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to seeing the new tactical systems in action." A tall SEAL with sergeant stripes stepped forward, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "You know much about the Barrett Murray, Lieutenant?" "Only what I've read in the reports," she answered honestly. The men exchanged glances. Some rolled their eyes. Sarah understood. These were Navy SEALs, the best of the best, and they knew it. Outsiders weren't welcome here, especially female officers with no combat experience on paper. But paper doesn't tell the whole story. As the training session began, Sarah watched with the intensity of someone studying a language they already spoke fluently. The SEALs were impressive, hitting targets at ranges that would make most marksmen weep. Yet she noticed something. A slight adjustment they weren't making for the crosswind that occasionally gusted through the valley. Small mistakes. Correctable mistakes. After an hour, during a break in the shooting, Sarah approached the rifle laid out on the preparation table. The Barrett MRAD was a masterpiece of engineering, a multi-caliber precision rifle that could reach targets over a mile away in the right hands. She ran her fingers along its stock, feeling its weight, its balance. "Mind if I give it a try?" she asked quietly. The laughter was immediate and loud. Commander Jackson didn't even try to hide his amusement. "Sure, Lieutenant," he gestured grandly toward the firing line, like a king granting permission to a jester. "Be our guest." The SEALs gathered to watch, nudging each other with knowing looks. Sarah felt their eyes on her back as she picked up the rifle. It felt right in her hands. Like coming home. Like an extension of herself. What they didn't know would change everything. What they didn't know was that Sarah Mitchell had grown up on ranges exactly like this one. That while other girls spent summers at camp making friendship bracelets, she was learning to calculate windage and elevation with her father. That after her mother died in combat when Sarah was just 12 years old, the shooting range became her therapy, her church, her connection to both parents who had served their country with everything they had. They didn't know about the countless hours she'd spent perfecting her craft in the shadows of her grief. They didn't know about her father's battle with cancer that was growing more desperate by the day, about the treatments that were failing, about the clock that was running out. They didn't know that she'd sat by his hospital bed 3 nights ago and promised him something. "I'll show them what a Mitchell can do, Dad. I promise." As Sarah settled into position behind the rifle, she took a deep breath. The target was set at 1,200 yards, a shot that had challenged even these elite warriors. The crosswind picked up, dancing through the valley like a living thing. She smiled slightly. Her father had taught her to love the wind, to read it like poetry. Sarah's first shot silenced the laughter. The second drew gasps. By the third, Commander Jackson was reaching for his binoculars, disbelief etched across his weathered face. The target at 1,200 yards showed 3 perfect hits clustered so tightly they formed a single ragged hole. "Beginner's luck," muttered one of the SEALs, but his voice lacked conviction, lacked certainty. Sarah adjusted her position slightly, compensating for the shifting wind. 3 more shots. 3 more perfect hits. The range fell silent except for the echo of gunfire against the distant mountains. It was the kind of silence that comes when assumptions shatter like glass. Commander Jackson approached slowly, his earlier mockery replaced by something closer to respect, though he fought against showing it. "Where did you learn to shoot like that, Lieutenant?" "My father," Sarah replied simply, not looking up from the scope. Colonel Mitchell believed marksmanship was both a science and an art. You needed both to master it. Recognition flickered in Jackson's eyes like a light switching on. "Billy Mitchell's daughter? Why didn't you say something?" Sarah finally met his gaze. Her voice was quiet but carried the weight of a lifetime of being underestimated. "Would it have mattered, sir?" The commander had no answer for that. The truth hung between them, uncomfortable and undeniable. Instead, he issued a challenge, perhaps to save face, perhaps because he needed to know just how good she really was. "Ghost Ridge," he said, gesturing toward a distant course barely visible as a series of metal targets scattered across rugged terrain. "No SEAL has ever completed it with a perfect score. The current record is held by Chief Peterson. 87% accuracy under combat conditions." Sarah studied the course. Ghost Ridge was infamous in special operations circles, a brutal test of marksmanship under physical duress. Shooters had to navigate rough terrain, engage targets at varying distances, and make split-second decisions while exhausted and under pressure. It was designed to break people. "I'd like to try," she said quietly. "Tomorrow morning. 0600. You'll need to qualify on our obstacle course first." That evening, alone in her temporary quarters, the adrenaline finally wearing off, Sarah called her father. Colonel Mitchell's voice was weaker than the last time they'd spoken, the cancer stealing his strength bit by bit, but not his spirit. Never his spirit. "They're testing you," he said after she described the day's events. "I know, Dad." Sarah studied the course maps she'd been given, committing every detail to memory. "Ghost Ridge isn't just about shooting. It's about proving I belong there." "No," her father corrected gently, with the wisdom of someone who'd spent a lifetime in service. "It's about proving to yourself that you do. That's the only opinion that matters." After hanging up, Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from her father's doctor. "Treatment not working as hoped. Discussing options tomorrow." She closed her eyes, fighting back tears. Time was running out like sand through her fingers. Tomorrow wasn't just about a course. It was about keeping a promise to a dying man. Dawn brought rain. Not the gentle kind that whispers against windows, but a steady, cold downpour that turned the obstacle course into a muddy nightmare designed to test the limits of human endurance. Sarah completed it in silence, ignoring the burning in her muscles and the cuts on her hands from the barbed wire crawl. Several SEALs watched from under shelter, their expressions unreadable, perhaps wondering if she'd quit, perhaps hoping she would. She didn't. By the time she reached Ghost Ridge, the rain had intensified. Visibility was poor, the targets obscured by sheets of water, the ground treacherous underfoot. Nature itself seemed determined to stop her. "We can postpone," Commander Jackson offered, and for the first time, there was genuine concern in his voice. "No one will think less of you." Sarah checked her rifle, ensuring the scope was protected. "No, sir. I'm ready." Because somewhere in a hospital, her father was fighting his own impossible battle. If he wouldn't quit, neither would she. The course began with a 300-yard uphill sprint to the first firing position. Sarah's lungs burned as she ran, weighted down with tactical gear and the rifle. The first target appeared, a small metal silhouette partially hidden behind brush. She dropped to a prone position, ignoring the mud soaking through her uniform, and fired. The target fell. As she progressed through the course, the challenges mounted like waves crashing against a shore. A section of unstable rocks gave way beneath her, sending her sliding down a ravine. She caught herself but wrenched her shoulder in the process. Pain shot down her arm with every movement, but she pushed forward. Pain was temporary. Promises were forever. At the halfway point, Sarah encountered Chief Peterson waiting at a resupply station. "Impressive shooting, Lieutenant, but the second half is where everyone fails." "Why is that, Chief?" "Because that's where we start shooting back." He pointed to several SEALs positioned throughout the course, armed with simulation rounds, painful but non-lethal projectiles that would mark any hit. Sarah hadn't been warned about this aspect of the test. The course was no longer just about marksmanship. It was about performing under fire, about making impossible shots while being hunted. As she moved to the next position, the first simulation round whizzed by her ear. Another struck the ground inches from her boot. She rolled into cover, heart pounding, the pain in her shoulder momentarily forgotten. Her father's voice echoed in her mind like a guiding star. "When everything goes wrong, that's when you find out who you really are." The final section of Ghost Ridge loomed before her. A series of elevated platforms connected by narrow beams, each requiring precision shots at targets that appeared randomly for mere seconds. Rain pelted her face as simulation rounds continued to fly past, some close enough that she could feel their displacement in the air. Her shoulder throbbed with each movement, but Sarah found a rhythm. Move, acquire, fire, confirm. The SEALs pursuing her were professionals, trained hunters. But she'd spent a lifetime learning to disappear into her surroundings, becoming part of the landscape rather than an intruder upon it. At the highest platform, a full 80 feet above the muddy ground, Sarah faced the most challenging shot of the course. A target placed 1,500 yards away, partially obscured by foliage, with crosswinds that changed direction unpredictably. No one had ever hit it on their first attempt. Most missed it entirely. Sarah took a deep breath, ignoring the simulation round that struck the platform inches from her elbow. She calculated the wind, the bullet drop, the rotation of the earth, all the factors her father had drilled into her since childhood. In that moment, she wasn't just a daughter keeping a promise. She was every person who'd ever been told they couldn't, every dreamer who'd been laughed at, every fighter who'd been counted out. Time seemed to slow as she exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The distant target fell. When Sarah completed the final obstacle and crossed the finish line, the world seemed to hold its breath. Commander Jackson stood waiting, stopwatch in hand, disbelief evident on his face. Behind him, several SEALs had gathered, their earlier mockery replaced by something that looked remarkably like respect. The kind of respect that can't be commanded, only earned. 100% accuracy, Jackson announced, his voice carrying across the now silent range. And 3 minutes under the course record. Chief Peterson stepped forward, extending his hand. That was some of the finest shooting I've ever seen, Lieutenant. Your father would be proud. Sarah accepted his handshake, too exhausted to speak, the mention of her father bringing a tightness to her throat. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, another message from the doctor, but she couldn't bring herself to look at it yet. Some truths you're not ready to face. That evening, as Sarah packed her gear, Commander Jackson appeared at her door. We received a call from headquarters, he said without preamble. There's a situation developing overseas. A team of intelligence officers is trapped behind enemy lines, including Admiral Hokran's son. The extraction team needs a precision shooter who can provide cover from an impossible position. Sarah thought of her father, of the treatments that weren't working, of the promise she'd made to him. She thought about going home, about being by his bedside. Then she thought about what he'd taught her, that service means showing up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. When do we leave? She asked. Wheels up in 30, if you're coming. 3 days later, Sarah lay motionless on a rocky outcrop overlooking a compound in a country whose name would never appear in official reports. Through her scope, she watched 8 figures move silently toward the extraction point, pursued by hostile forces. The lead SEAL, Chief Peterson, signaled their position. Sarah's job was to eliminate any threat that came within 200 meters of the extraction team. For 6 hours, she remained perfectly still, becoming stone, becoming wind. Taking shots only when necessary, each one finding its mark despite the harsh conditions and extreme distances. Every trigger pull was a prayer. Every hit was a promise kept. When the helicopter finally appeared, extracting both the intelligence officers and the SEAL team without casualties, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Mission accomplished. Upon returning to base, Sarah was met by Lieutenant General Janet Wolfenberger herself. Your father would have been here, the general said softly, but his condition worsened while you were deployed. Sarah's heart sank like a stone into dark water. But Wolfenberger continued, her hand on Sarah's shoulder. He's stable now. The doctors tried an experimental treatment and he's responding well. He's asking for you. 2 weeks later, Colonel William Mitchell sat in a wheelchair on the same training grounds where his daughter had made history. Before him stood the entire SEAL team in perfect formation as General Wolfenberger pinned the Navy Cross to Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell's uniform. For extraordinary heroism in combat operations, the citation read, though the details would remain classified for decades. As the ceremony concluded, Commander Jackson approached with something in his hands. A custom-made Barrett MRAD rifle with an inscription on the stock, Lieutenant Mitchell, Ghost Ridge Champion. The team wanted you to have this, he said. We've never seen shooting like yours, and we've never been so glad to be proven wrong. That evening, Sarah sat beside her father's wheelchair as the sun set over the Virginia mountains, painting the sky in colors that seemed too beautiful for a world with so much pain in it. I always knew, her father said quietly, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. I always knew you'd show them. But more importantly, you showed yourself. Sarah held his hand, feeling the calluses earned from a lifetime of service. I kept my promise, Dad. No, he said, squeezing her hand with surprising strength. You did something better. You became who you were always meant to be. Sometimes we make promises to the people we love. Sometimes we keep them. And sometimes, in keeping them, we discover that we're capable of more than we ever imagined. Sarah Mitchell didn't just conquer Ghost Ridge that day. She conquered every doubt, every assumption, every voice that said she couldn't.